Right, I'm putting it out there. If City lose against Liverpool this weekend, I reckon that's the title race done and dusted a month before Christmas. Let us know what you think in the comments. I'm Matt. Welcome to the Footy Social Club's Game Week 13 Premier League predictions. First up, we have Brighton versus Southampton. So Brighton have only lost 2 of their first 12 games this season, and they're unbeaten at the Amex. They've picked up impressive wins against Man United, against Spurs, and most recently against City. But what's more interesting is the teams that they've picked up draws against. Those teams being Wolves and Ipswich, who some might consider the smaller teams in the Premier League, and definitely the ones that are under threat of relegation. So does that mean that also under threat of relegation Southampton might share the points this weekend? Now look, Southampton haven't exactly had the best start to the season, picking up just 4 points from a potential 36 across their first 12 games. And look, they're not exactly high scoring. They've failed to score in 4 of their games, and out of the ones where they have managed to score, only 2 of those games have seen them find the back of the net twice. One of those, though, was most recently against Liverpool. But despite Southampton only scoring 9 this season, Brighton do tend to concede in a lot of their games. In fact, the only 2 games where they haven't conceded were that win against Newcastle and the draw against Ipswich. I think this is going to be a really entertaining game where both teams are going to score, but in the end, the Seagulls will take home the points. I predict a 2-1 win to Brighton. Next up, we have Brentford versus Leicester. Following the sacking of Ten Hag earlier on in the campaign, Steve Cooper is now the second manager to lose his job this season. I guess the bigger question is who's going to replace him. Graham Potter, Ruud van Nistelrooy and David Moyes are all in the running, so only time will tell, but it's my understanding that Leicester want to make an appointment quickly. But whoever comes in is going to need to change Leicester's fortunes pretty quickly. They're currently sat in 16th, having picked up 2 wins, which, in fairness to Steve Cooper, it did mean that they were outperforming Ipswich and Southampton, obviously the other clubs who had been promoted to the Premier League. Now, going to the G-Tech this weekend is not going to be easy, especially considering that Brentford are unbeaten in 13 of the last 14 games at home. In fact, they're on an impressive 3-game winning streak at the G-Tech, and during those games, they scored an impressive 12 goals. They did concede 8, though. Along with that, you've also got to consider that Leicester have only won once on the road this season during that 3-2 win against Southampton. Now, I expect to see goals in this one, with the probability being over 75% that both teams will score, and we'll see over 2.5 goals. For me, though, I reckon Brentford are going to continue their impressive home form. I predict a 3-1 win to Brentford. Next up, we have Crystal Palace versus Newcastle. Now, consistency is the key issue for Eddie Howe's Newcastle, or rather, the lack of it. 5 wins, 3 draws and 4 losses, including that 2-0 defeat to West Ham last time out. Now, for me, when I'm doing these predictions, Newcastle are consistently the most difficult team to predict. Considering they can pick up points or win against Arsenal, an informed Nottingham Forest, Spurs, City, but then drop points to Everton and lose to Fulham or West Ham. Now, Palace, they picked up a 2-2 draw last game out against Aston Villa, despite only having 30% of the possession in that game. Now, an issue for Palace, amongst their many issues, is their inability to hold a lead. Just like in that game against Villa, we saw the same thing against Everton, where they taken the lead and then lost, and then the same thing with Wolves, where they took the lead and then eventually had to claw back a 2-2 draw. 1 win from 12 sees them sat in 19th, and a visit from Newcastle this weekend could mean they stay there for another week. Now, I've got a feeling this could be a relatively low-scoring game. I predict a 1-0 win to Newcastle. Next up, we have Nottingham Forest versus Ipswich. Now, I want to hear from any Forest fans in the comments. If you were told at the beginning of the season that after 12 games you'd be in 7th place, would you be happy? Anyway, recent games have been tough for the Garibaldis. They go into this one following back-to-back losses to Arsenal and Newcastle. Chris Wood is joint 3rd along with Mbeumo in the scoring table, scoring an impressive 0.78 goals per game. The only 2 above him are Haaland and Salah, and I reckon he's going to nab a goal this weekend. Now, Ipswich, on the other hand, have had a fairly decent run in their last 3 games, picking up draws against Leicester and Man United, and of course, that emphatic 2-1 win over Spurs. The Tractor Boys have scored in all but 3 of their games this season, whereas Forest have scored in all but 2. This is going to be a tough game for both sides, and the Garibaldis will be desperate not to make it 3 losses on the bounce. Now, I could easily see this one ending in a draw, but I'm going to be a little bit bullish for the Reds. I predict a 2-1 win to Forest. Next up, we have Wolves versus Bournemouth. Now, Bournemouth come into this one off the back of 2 successive losses, whereas Wolves, surprisingly, are unbeaten in their last 4, having won their last 2. Is Gary O'Neill finally steering that Wolves ship in the right direction after a very tough start to the season? Interestingly, the home and away form of these two is actually fairly evenly matched. At home, Wolves have suffered 4 defeats and picked up a win and a draw, whereas on the road, Bournemouth have suffered 4 defeats, picked up 2 draws and 1 win. Now, the stats show that both teams are really good at scoring and conceding later on in a game. 10 of the 28 that Wolves have conceded this season have come within the last 15 minutes, whereas 5 of the 17 that Bournemouth have conceded have come within the same time period. I think one of these will lead for the majority of the game before we see a last-ditch goal that will end up sharing the points. I'm predicting a 2-2 draw. Next up, we have West Ham versus Arsenal. Now, Lopetegui bought himself some more time with that 2-0 victory over Newcastle last time out. And in fact, in fairness, they have won 3 of their last 6, and they will be hoping that they do not see a repeat of last season's match up against Arsenal that saw the Gunners smash them 6-0. They currently sit 14th with 15 points from a possible 36, and a win this weekend, if results above them go their way, could see them move up a few places. Now, moving on to Arsenal, in a year where City are absolutely faltering, this could have been Arteta's time to strike. But not only is Arne Slot absolutely bossing it at Liverpool, but Arsenal, I think, I've had too many slip-ups this early on. Defeats at Bournemouth and Newcastle will not have helped their title challenge, but confidence will be high going into this one, as they've seen 2 successive victories, one against Nottingham Forest in the league last time out, and then they absolutely smashed Sporting 5-1 in the Champions League midweek. Other than a couple of injuries, both teams can field pretty much full strength squads this weekend. Now, I don't think this is going to be a massively high scoring game. I predict a 2-0 win to Arsenal. Next up, we have Chelsea versus Villa. Now, Villa managed to stop the bleeding last time out after 4 successive defeats in all competitions, picking up that 2-2 draw with Palace. Chelsea, on the other hand, have only lost once in their last 6 Premier League games, that 2-1 defeat to Liverpool. And last time out, they managed to secure that 2-1 win against Leicester. And I'm just going to say this, it should have been a 2-0. It shouldn't have been 2-1. It shouldn't have been a penalty. And the guy tripped over his own ankle, and somehow VAR still gives it as a penalty. You may disagree with this, as other people have. Let us know in the comments, should that have been a penalty in that Chelsea-Leicester game? Anyway, it's also crucial to note that since that opening game defeat against City, Chelsea are unbeaten at Stamford Bridge this season. Now, back to the Midlands, Emery's Villa are going to need to pull further out of that slump as quickly as they can if they are in any hopes whatsoever of maintaining that top 4 finish. I'm really not sure how much they can do that this weekend though. Now, I'm drifting between a Chelsea win or a very tight draw, but I'm going to be bullish and I'm going to go for a Chelsea win. I predict it will be 2-1 to the Blues. Next up, we have Man United versus Everton. Now, Amorim's first game in charge saw United draw 1-1 with Ipswich, and it all started so strongly with Rashford's early goal, and then United just reverted to type and sat back and let the game happen. Now, they have lost twice at home this season, but in a more silver lining look at things, they have picked up 7 points from a potential 9 across their last 3 games at home. Everton, on the other hand, well, they've failed to score in their last 3 Premier League matches, picking up a loss to Southampton and successive draws against West Ham and Brentford. Dwight McNeil remains their top scorer with 3 goals, and he's going to be hoping he can get back to scoring ways. Whether he can do that this weekend, not entirely sure. Now, if history is anything to go by, United should feel a little bit more confident going into this one, considering out of the last 5 times they played Everton in all competitions, they've won all 5. Whereas in terms of Everton's most recent form in all competitions, they've won just 1 of their last 6 away games. They are unbeaten in 8 of their last 9 games across all competitions though. Will Amorim's philosophy start to get through to the United players this early on? Probably not. I predict a 1-1 draw. Next up, we have Spurs versus Fulham. Now, if anyone had Spurs to smash Man City 4-0 last time out, get your name in the comments because I might need to talk to you about research for future prediction videos. Now, whilst it's all well and good, Spurs going out and doing that to City, they've got a similar problem, as I mentioned earlier, with Eddie Howe at Newcastle, and that is consistency. How do you go from losing 2-1 to Ipswich, no offence, Ipswich fans, to absolutely annihilating Man City 4-0? Now, one major positive for Spurs, and you will always get this from an Ange Postecoglou team, is their ability to score goals. In fact, in their last 6 home games, Spurs have won 4 and scored an impressive 16 times. Whereas across Fulham's last 6 away games, they've won twice, drawn twice, and lost twice. But in fairness, 2 of those losses came against the 2 Manchester clubs, and one of those wins came against a very in-form Forest. I mean, when you look at the stats and form, there have got to be goals in this one, especially when you consider that Fulham have scored in all but 1 of their games this season, and Spurs have scored in all but 3. Now, the odds predict that Spurs should win in this one, and on this occasion, I'm going to agree with them. I predict a 3-1 win to Spurs. Next up, we have Liverpool versus Man City. Now, I know we're only 12 games into the season and we will be 13 games in by this weekend, and it's probably too early to declare the title race done and dusted, but look, if Liverpool beat City, they will be far, far, far ahead of them. City's slump is not your usual autumnal slump. There's something different going on there. I think it genuinely could all be over this weekend. Let us know in the comments if you agree or if I'm talking absolute nonsense. Anyway, Liverpool have lost just 1 of their 9 home games in all competitions this season, and they're on a 4-game winning streak in the league at Anfield. The Citizens, on the other hand, well, they haven't won since October 26th. They perhaps stopped the bleeding midweek during that 3-3 draw in the Champions League against Feyenoord, but confidence cannot be high going into this one. However, is this the game where Pep turns it all around? Now, I'm a Man United fan, so frankly, I hope they both lose, but as I don't see this one ending in a draw, and therefore someone has to win, I'm predicting a 3-2 win to Liverpool.